Looking at Enron, we spoke about this earlier. We said Enron's profits were huge. By the year 2000, it's almost $1 billion, 979 million. Yet they went bankrupt in 2001. Well, let's have a look why. You should never just look at profits on their own. We want to look at cash at bank. So here's Enron's cash flow statement for those 5 years leading up to the bankruptcy. So we want money to be coming from operating activities. So you can see they are generating, in the early years, not much cash, but by the end years, a lot of cash from operating. About $4.8 billion in cash, net cash from operating, which is fantastic. But where does that money go? So they spent it, and you can see whatever they made from running their business, it looks like they spent on buying non-current assets. So looking at, for example, in 1996, they made this much, which is good, but then they spent way more than they actually made. So where does that money come from? Well, there's only one other place. It's got to have come from the financing section. Taking their most recent year, they made a lot of cash, that's true, but then they spent a lot of it on non-current assets. Now, at least that's sustainable. We've got operating being more than investing. But these 2 years here are dreadful. In fact, the 3 years, we've got lots of money coming in from operating, but each year we're spending a lot. We're spending 10 times as much as we made here, than 10 times as much on non-current assets than we made from operating. Here we're spending about $4 billion when we only made 1.6, and here we're spending 3.5 billion when we only made about 1.3 billion. So that is not sustainable. And the reason we know that is because they must have been paying their bills. So where'd the money come from? It's come from their financing section. You can see each year financing activities have been used to top them up. So they've generated that from operating, spent more than that on investing, and then they've kind of topped up their bank balance by going and borrowing money, which is not good. Take the most recent year, for example, they made a lot of money from operating, spent a lot on investing, so they must have gone to the bank and borrowed a lot of money. So you can see, look at these figures here, borrowing of money, borrowing of money, borrowing of money. That's a lot of debt. What do we know what happens when you get a lot of debt? You go broke. Hence, it really shouldn't have been that big a surprise that Enron went broke. Looking at Lehman Brothers, similar story. We looked at their net profits over the years, huge in the billions of dollars, but they went broke following 12 months after that $4 billion profit. Let's look at their cash flow statement. Operating activities, they weren't generating money from day-to-day activities. So this came as a great shock for the world when Lehman Brothers went broke, but you have to ask why. Look at that, they can't generate any money from day-to-day trading. Now, banking is a bit of a different industry, the margins are very thin and so on, but that's a real worry. In fact, this represents $46 billion of net cash outflows from operating. So if you can't make cash from your day-to-day trading, where does it come from? Well, it's either got to be from investing, and you can see it wasn't for them. In fact, they were spending money on investing, not much compared to the other numbers, but a little bit. So how did they get by every year? Well, simple answer is if you're spending all your money on day-to-day running of the business and buying non-current assets, how do you keep the business going? By borrowing money. So you can see every year they've had to borrow a lot of money. So this year they've had to borrow 12 billion, this year 38 billion, and this year $48.5 billion just to cover how much money they're losing daily and how much they're spending on non-current assets. So Lehman Brothers is another great example of how you want to be financing your business from operating activities and not the other two sources. Another Australian example is ABC Learning, so founded by Eddie Groves, and he took it from one small childcare centre in 1998 to by the end he was opening up 4 centres per week. So here's the number of centres in the last 7 years of ABC Learning. They went from 43 to 94 to 187 to 327, 660, 1257, and then it almost doubled in 1 year to over 2,000. So exponential growth. And if they're buying new centres, what section of the cash flow statement would that be? Well, they're buying non-current assets. So we would expect big cash outflows in the investing section. Now that's not a bad thing. That's investing in the future. Let's look at their net profit. You can see very small in the beginning, but then getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, great result in 2007, $143 million, yet it went broke within 12 months. So let's have a look at some reasons why. Obviously not the share market. People on the share market, they just didn't obviously look at cash balances and the cash flow statement, and you can see the share price kept on going up and up and up. But what they should have been doing is looking at profits and cash. So now we look at profit and cash. You can see profit went up 52 million that year, but so did cash. Cash went up 45, so that doesn't really tell us much. Cash went up 88 and profit of 81, profit of 143, and they made $123 million of cash. So to someone with a reasonable knowledge of accounting, they can look at that and go, oh, hang on, this is a business that has a lot of cash. They're doing a great job. That's true, but we want to be a little bit smarter than that, and that's why we do a cash flow statement. We want to know, where does that money come from? Yes, you made $123 million, but where does that cash come from? So we need to go and look at the cash flow statement. So we want to be making money from operating, so you can see a little bit each year. So by the third year, we're making about $207 million net cash from operating. But they're buying a lot of non-current assets. We saw that they were buying all those centres. Those centres almost doubled in 1 year. Well, that's reflected in that figure there. They spent about $1.6 billion buying new childcare centres. Now, how do you pay for that? Well, it's clearly not being paid for from the cash from day-to-day trading. Not even close. So they must be paying for it by borrowing money. And again, same old story. You can see a lot of borrowings, a lot of borrowings, a lot of borrowings. And borrowings incur interest, and it makes you more risky, and it shouldn't be a great surprise when businesses like this go broke.